inch. We fight for that inch.
Rarely do I see any American Italians eating in here.
But I'm funny how? I mean, funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you?
Villkoret är att jag får leva.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
Hey there, welcome to Real Genius. I'm Chris Vognar, culture critic for the Dallas Morning News.
And I'm Robert Wilonsky, the city columnist for the Dallas Morning News.
Hey now. I don't think you've ever said that on Real Genius.
Well, it's only become official
I know.
the last few days.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Very awesome. You hated vinyl. HBO's vinyl, Martin Scorsese, Mick Jagger's vinyl.
An hour into it, I realized at that point I was simply hate watching it.
See, that's funny to me because I know I've read some reviews that are like, yeah, it's okay. I liked it, but I wasn't completely over the moon about it. But I would love to hear why you hated it.
I don't get the people who've really loved it. And I guess we should talk about it first before we get into it. We should
could do
talk
that.
about it. Look at it's Martin Scorsese, Terrence Winter, Mick Jagger's retelling of the 1970s rock and roll music radio business. With Bobby Cannavale as the record executive who was in the midst of selling out his label, American Century.
End up falling steeply off the wagon.
Right, selling it to Polygram.
The German Polygram.
Right, the German Polygram. That's really kind of what it's about. It's basically, as I've seen it described, and I thought very accurately so because I believe I said the same thing before I read it, Bobby Cannavale is the Forrest Gump of rock and roll in this particular adaptation of that particular genre and era.
That's a low blow.
But it is. Oh my God, it is. That's all it is. He's Forrest Gump. He's Forrest Gumping his way through mounds of cocaine and murder in the 1970s whilst trying to sign Led Zeppelin.
And I ask, what is wrong with this? You want to watch the little making of?
Yeah, let's watch a few seconds of it, then we'll come back and talk about why it's the biggest piece of crap on TV.
This is Marty and company talking about New York rock and roll in the 70s.
Well, the city of New York in the early 70s was at this low point with a crime rate that was really high. As is often the case, however, tumultuous times and circumstances can prove to be fertile ground for producing great artists.
There was also something authentic about what New York was. There was an exciting struggle that we were all going through, and it's really dangerous.
What I think is interesting about this period of time is there's a lot of despair in the world, and all that anger and frustration is channeled into the music.
The 70s was the most interesting period because so many different things were happening. 73 specifically was the year that punk, disco, and hip-hop all were invented within a 6-month period of each other, within about a 5-mile radius of each other in New York City.
So Pilot's directed by Martin Scorsese. I've seen some people say it's like a really good Scorsese movie. I think it's a pretty good Scorsese movie.
I think it's a parody of a Scorsese movie.
I think it has so much good filmmaking in it that even if some of the content bothered me as much as it bothers you, and it clearly doesn't, I think I would still like it just because of the chops that are on display here. And Bobby Cannavale is fantastic.
He's great. Look, it's long past time that he becomes a leading man. He's been a character actor for so long. I've liked him ever since Station Agent.
So good in that.
I've been a huge fan of his for a million years. It just, for the first 20 minutes, I was kind of giggling at it. It was fun. It was kind of engaging, kind of endearing, kind of just a thrill ride through that particular period. But when the punk rock band shows up, that sounds more like 1981 Circle Jerks, Los Angeles.
The Nasty Bits.
The Nasty Bits. And I swear to God, I do not believe in the 1970s bands were ending their names with Z's at that particular period. I get it. It's supposed to be the Heartbreakers. It's supposed to be the Ramones, but it's not the Ramones. It's not the Heartbreakers. It's more like Circle Jerks or Black Flag or something that sounds completely inappropriate to the time, both behaviorally and musically. Then it started to lose me. I started to realize this is a lot like that ABC show, The Goldbergs, that my kid's a real big fan of. It's set in the 1980s.
I thought you were a big fan of it.
I am. But The Goldberg is set in that amorphous 1980s. So you'll have one episode that's devoted to the Beastie Boys, which is later 80s, one episode devoted to the Goonies, or one episode devoted to Ferris Bueller or Weird Al or whatever. But it's not a specific year. This is supposed to take place in a specific year, 1973. But it's the 70s all sort of amalgamated into a singular moment.
It has some very specific markers, too. I mean, it's that...
Right, that's one of my problems.
Times Square movie theater with Deep Throat and The Devil and Miss Jones.
Right, it can't kind of figure out if it's sort of told in that hazy... I mean, it's all told from Bobby Cannavale's character's recollection. He talks about at the beginning of the episode, What is this if not memories are full of self-aggrandizement, incorrect memories, and flashbacks that sort of take you down wrong paths. And I get the idea that that's kind of what's happening here. But it's just not very fun at a certain point. It just becomes cliche, mounted upon cliche, mounted upon cliche. By the time we finally see Robert Plant, a guy who doesn't look like nor sound like Robert Plant.
He was fine.
The
Peter
Grant doesn't look anything. Oh.
He was really good though. That tantrum he throws.
Yeah, the guy who played John Lennon years ago, which I think is kind of a funny in-joke if you remember the fact that that actor played John Lennon many, many years ago. I just didn't find it very fun. And then you add in this inexplicable and wildly unnecessary murder subplot that factors into it, which you know is going to come very early on because Bobby Cannavale's character uses the homicide detective's business card in the very first scene to cut the cocaine off of his rear view mirror.
Although that's a little twist too. I mean, that's not specifically, I don't want to spoil anything, but that card might not be directly connected to this particular murder.
I think it is.
It's not actually. It's there. I just spoiled it.
Have you seen more than the first episode?
Oh yeah, I have. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's all right. Well,
I spoiled it for you too.
No, I hate to break it to you.
I've seen the first 5.
Scorsese spoiled it for me in the first episode, so you've not spoiled anything for me.
So, okay, so to play devil's advocate.
So wait, so you've seen the first 5?
I have.
So does it get better?
The characters and the stories develop. It sets its roots in a little bit more, but I have a feeling if you didn't like the first one, and you clearly didn't, that you'll probably have problems with the rest as well. Okay, so to play devil's advocate, is it possible that you're sort of rock nerding, you're kind of like hate rock nerding on this and saying, oh, that's not quite right, this wouldn't happen that way, instead of kind of going with the energy of it and this kind of very romanticized
I have no patience
look
for that I mean, for me, if I want to watch romanticized, energetic recollections of rock and roll in the 1970s, I'll watch Almost Famous, which I think is a wildly more entertaining sort of depiction of the same period and the problems, the pitfalls, the perils of rock and roll and radio in the 1970s and the drug use that went along with it, or the self-aggrandizement that went along with it. It's funny, I was reading, after I watched it, I got on Facebook and there's Danny Bayless from The Ticket talking about how much he said, am I wrong or is this just the biggest piece of crap? And I'm like, no, I'm wild, I'm with you. And he responded that it felt to him like an after-school special with just a few extra snorts of coke and some nudity and some graphic depictions of sexuality. It did. It felt like a cautionary tale. There was no fun. There was no energy. There was no...
See, I think there's a lot of energy.
Well, there's energy, but there's no fun.
Bursting with energy.
There's no fun. I find it to be one of those things it's a manic energy, but I don't find it an engaging or energizing energy.
What fascinates me about the core of this, of Vinyl, is that you have this guy who has sort of decided to be a responsible businessman, and he's gotten sober, and he's thinking about selling the label. And there's this romantic impulse towards rock and roll as this sort of state of ecstasy, and in typical Scorsese fashion, he's sort of being ripped apart by these two factors. By do I want to be an adult and do the responsible thing, or do I just want to be a complete hedonist? And I think there's some real torment in the performance.
But I don't find anything about him in the first episode, and again, I've only seen the first 2 hours, but I found nothing about him that made me think that he loved music, other than the fact that people keep saying, you got great ears. I don't even know what that means.
How about his first encounter with the blues musician who he takes under his wing with some
and
fairly
screws
disastrous
over
results?
Yeah, I find that to be just just a bunch of name dropping. I found no passion to it. They're name dropping Blind Willie Johnson or whoever else Son House or whoever they name dropped during that brief conversation, and his failure to defend and promote the artist who he falls in love with. I mean, if he really loved him, he'd have set up his own label and he'd done his own thing instead of turning him into, some version of a mediocre chess band.
But that's just it. He has to make this horrible compromise. And I think this is largely...
Right, but he's really comfortable with it.
I think this is largely about the horrible compromise.
But he's comfortable with it from the get-go.
Because he wants money and he wants to succeed.
Right, but I don't find their passion for the music anywhere in there. I mean, if he's compromises from jump. And then other than people saying, you got good ears, I find no proof of the fact that Cannavale's character likes music whatsoever. Like, it's not even part of his life. This is a guy who lied about going to Woodstock.
What about the scene where he's kind of saved by the New York Dolls concert in the midst of his
He's
his
wildly
breakdown?
coked out of his mind.
He is.
I don't. He's saved. Look, that's the most honest scene of the whole thing.
It's a great scene.
That warehouse truly did
Yes, it
collapse
did.
on them when
The
they were
Mercer
performing.
Arts
The
Center.
Mercer Arts Center. I thought that was a great sequence. Other than the fact that they don't really look like the New York Dolls, they're just lip syncing to the New York Dolls. Whatever.
Will you watch another episode?
I will hate watch it the same way I hate watch The Newsroom.
Will you give yourself the possibility of perhaps liking it if it gets better?
I clearly realized one thing. I need to start doing way more drugs because I think that might have made it far more interesting because it makes most things way more
I
interesting.
think I had a
clearly.
double latte right before I watched it.
I gotta tell you, I got super bored. And when the murder occurs, I was just like, oh, this is so... that's when it, to me, I turned it off for a while. I mean, I got up, looked for the remote, which I couldn't find, and just turned off the television. Because I thought, I'm out. It just becomes this Scorsese thing. It felt like a punchline to a joke that had not been set up.
I'm with you on that. Actually, I think it's designed to kind of have this thing hanging over Richie Finestra, Bobby Cannavale's character's head throughout the series. But yeah, it felt a little bit. And I think you're saying that a lot of this is like Scorsese's greatest hits, kind of compressed. I felt like that whole episode was, especially when it kind of turns into a Goodfellas scene.
I can't believe this is, I'm supposed to be watching this thing about rock and roll in the 70s, man. Next thing I know, I'm watching him dump a body.
What do you hear, Robert De Niro?
Are you kidding me?
There's Robert De Niro to show up and say the hoof.
I just couldn't believe that that's where this had gone. And at that point, I was out. I mean, if that hadn't happened, my thoughts about it might be a little bit different.
Did you watch the rest of it?
I did.
Okay.
I watched the whole thing. I watched through the trailer where, oh, look, now we're going to see Andy Warhol, and Olivia Wilde's going to go back to her life as Lou Reed's muse.
So again, why? What is wrong with this?
I'm not saying anything's wrong with it, but it does. The Forrest Gump thing, I think, really does start to feel very appropriate after a while when you look at how this thing's going to kind of play itself out.
Life is like a Marshall stack.
I'm going to punch you in the throat.
You just never know when it's going to fall.
I'm going to take away your singing ability.
Oh. That wouldn't be hard. But,
and the whole thing about, I'm sorry, was hip hop born in 1973?
He was I mean, we'll say it's Kool Herc. Kool Herc was doing that in '73.
Yeah. I mean, I remember certainly knowing a bit about that, but my favorite part, I guess I don't mean to imply that it's inaccurate when it comes to the birth of hip hop. It's not. But I do love the fact that in the very first scene, Cannavale's early in the episode, he's driving with the windows up in his limousine, talking to his driver. We hear Kool Herc.
We hear the spinning of records.
We hear the spinning of records.
Beat juggling.
We hear all the beat juggling, which is about a half a mile away from where Cannavale is at that point. And he says to his driver, "What's that sound?" You couldn't hear it. What sound are you talking about? The sound of the cement under the wheels? He couldn't hear it, and yet it was so calling to him that from half a mile away, they had to go in search of this sound that I guarantee you, in New York City, you couldn't have heard a block away. And it just drove me insane.
I can tell.
If we're going to do it as a fantasy, let's do it as a fantasy. If we're going to do it as fact, a blending of fact and fiction, let's do that. But let's not do this half-assed hybrid.
See, I think it's a blending of fact and fiction, and I think it's a fantasy. I think it's all of the above, actually.
Oh, it's the world's worst double album.
But you'll watch it again. You'll watch the next one.
So long as they weed out the seeds and stems.
There you go. Well put, sir. Sunday nights, 9 p.m. Vinyl. I like it. Robert hates it. Oscars
well, I did. I
next
really
week.
hated it.
I
really hated it.
I can tell. Oscars next week.
Yeah.
A little predicting.
We're not wearing tuxedos again.
Little Oscar so whiting, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
No tuxedos.
Well, we should just. We've never made predictions. Let's just straight up predict.
All right. I'm not very good at it.
I'm not either. But let's just straight up predict.
Cool. Okay. Do not take our predictions to the bank, but do watch us next week.